Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com. This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to another edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of Fair Housing and Commercial Property Division for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And if you note that I'm a little nervous, it's because I'm excited. I'm really excited about our guest, about what we're going to talk about. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so the person that I brought on here today, Mr. Jeffrey Paul May, is an expert. He's a guru. He's been doing this for longer than I can count. He is a urban and regional planner and principal at International Development and Planning, LLC. He has more than 20 years of experience working on projects involving community development, economic development, census data analysis and mapping, fair housing, fair lending, zoning, real estate development, nonprofit management, and public participation. He's also served on the Fannie Mae Housing Impact Advisory Council and the National Fair Housing Alliance Board of Directors. He's also been a member of the state of Louisiana and the national capital chapters of the American Planning Association. So this is by far an expert in this material, and I want to welcome Jeffrey Paul May, otherwise known as the bow tie guy. And you'll see why.
That's right. That's right.
Welcome to PHRC Speaks.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian. It is my pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you here. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time to join us. So the first question that I have for you, how'd you get into this? I mean, it's not like fair housing and affirmatively furthering fair housing. It's not one of those careers that when a teacher asks, what are you going to do when you grow up? I'm going to be a fair housing guru.
You now might see job descriptions that say fair housing, expert needed, or, subject matter expert in affirmative furthering fair housing. But when I started, and not so long ago, that did not exist. So I've actually, as you shared with the audience, I've been in fair housing for over 20 years. It has been in fair housing enforcement. However, what brought me into fair housing is that prior to being in fair housing, I actually worked in inpatient, outpatient mental health services. So I worked for several different private hospitals and also the state psychiatric hospital, adolescent psychiatric hospital. But then after I graduated from undergrad and I was in graduate school, I started working in Louisiana, we call our counties parishes. So I worked for Jefferson Parish, which is the county right next door to to Orleans Parish or Orleans County, and I was a case manager, and also I was a person who worked on the crisis line as well. So I was a treatment counselor as well as personing, the staff in the crisis line, taking kind of shifts on that. So as a treatment counselor, I was actually working in the supportive housing program. So that's one of HUD's initiatives in which they help persons who have physical and or mental health diagnoses, as well as substance abuse diagnoses, which would be a disability, find permanent housing. And so we were using the Hospital Without Walls model, and I was meeting with my clients all across the parish, trying to help them find permanent rental housing. So as I was trying to work with my clients, we were being asked questions that were just inappropriate. Now I know in fair housing, these would be violations of 42 United States Code 3604C of the Fair Housing Act, which are statements. But they were asking questions like, okay, these people, they have mental health problems. They weren't using mental health problems. They were saying, they were using the words that we don't use. Right. And they were questioning their disability and asking, well, what happens if they freak out? And what should we do? And I, trying to show them that, look, the parish is here to support them through the program. We're not going to go into the nature of their disability. That isn't their concern. Just be aware that they are in a position that they can actually live here and that their rent's going to be taken care of. Ms. Adrian, the part that I didn't catch until the fair housing person came and spoke and trained us is that they were asking questions. They were asking me questions, a few people, and are you going to be coming here? So I didn't realize. I said, well, I said, yeah, I'll be coming. I won't be alone. There'll be some other people coming as well. I didn't realize that it wasn't just my clients that they didn't want there. It was me that they didn't want there.
Wow. Yeah.
So I had the local fair housing center, the Great New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center, which I later would go on to work for. I actually had them come out and do us and speak to us and actually do a training, educating us about housing discrimination and what we need to look out for, and that there's something that can be done to address it. So after the presentation, the person who was still a friend of mine, Rosalind Washington, she said, we have a job opening for a test coordinator. And I said, okay. So I applied, and the rest is literally, as it said, it's history.
You started in the mental health profession, and you got to see firsthand not only the personal discrimination against you, but you also got to see that personal or that discrimination against individuals with mental disabilities and behavioral disabilities, and the discrimination based on the stereotyping, because right away they believe that they can't control themselves. Moving a little bit more forward in your history, tell us about Independent Planning and Development LLC. How does that start? What does it do? Give us the rundown.
I started international development planning right at the time when I was the executive director. After I started working at the Great New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center, I worked at the National Fair Housing Alliance for a while as a member services director, and then the opportunity came for me to be the executive director of the Great New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center. Well, it was at that time that I made the decision. I said I was aware that there were a lot of activities that, as FIPS and FAPS, but just for everyone knows that you all are a FAP, that's a Fair Housing Assistance Program, and we were a FIP at the Great New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center, that there was work that we weren't able to quite do. And what got my attention was there's a decennial survey that's done, the Housing Discrimination Survey, and so there are for-profit entities, contracting firms that actually go after that work. So when I left the Greater New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center and went into private practice as an urban planner, I'm really kind of working with real estate professionals, apartment management companies, analyzing data, because I'm an urban regional planner, I'm a geographic information systems person. So data is your friend, data is my friend. Mm-hmm. I found myself being in a place and space that there was a fair amount of work for us to be able to go after and pursue. So I created the organization when I actually got asked to come up here, because I was in New Orleans. I'm actually now in Silver Spring, Maryland. I traveled up here to work at a firm called DB Consulting Group, and they're still in existence. They were an 8A firm, and so they had a couple contracts to actually conduct, assist HUD in their investigations, mystery shopping all across the country. And so I did that. I was, a part of overseeing those contracts and building that team and working with some extraordinary people to do that work. And it was at that time that I had started the firm, but I really hadn't pursued much work underneath it. And it wasn't until I would say about 2008, 2009, when we really started actually being, kind of offered opportunities to work on these projects that I knew about and that I had actually worked at DB Consultant overseeing. That was the first time when we were being asked to really kind of be a part of this and actually take on those contracts. So what we do, just quickly, is that we provide research and data analysis services. So as I said, I'm a map maker, I'm a GIS guy, but I'm also a HMDA data analysis, census data analysis. So HMDA data analysis is Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. That's the data that lending institutions report to the federal government, the disposition of all the loan applications that they receive. So we analyze that data. Same thing with mapping and GIS. We also actually draft analysis of impediments, consolidated plans, master plans, strategic plans for local and state government agencies. We are technical assistance providers for HUD. So We've been a part of the round when everyone had to do their assessments of fair housing, which they no longer have to do now. We've now gone back to announced impediments, which I know we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
We draft those, and we were actually assisting those agencies, local agencies that were the first and second round, to do that. And then lastly, we train. So right now we actually have we're contracted with we're subcontract to Cloudburst Consulting Group to actually develop the curricula for the National Housing Training Academy and deliver those courses.
Just to give you an idea, our audience is made up of some municipal officials, social service providers, lenders, the community at large. So as we get into the meat and potatoes, break it down for me in its simplest form. What is affirmatively furthering fair housing?
Well, thank you, and thank you for that question. This is something, in fact, on tomorrow we're doing a training on affirmative furthering fair housing and the legacy of the impact of discriminatory legacy zoning ordinances, housing building codes for that matter. The simplest way, in my opinion, to understand what affirmatively furthering fair housing is, this is where fair housing and land use meet. I'm gonna say that again, fair housing and land use meet. So most of us are familiar with the Fair Housing Act, those of us who use it, such as yourself, and other FAPs across the country and FIPs across the country as well, and HUD as well, used to receiving and investigating rental discrimination complaints. People can't find homes, or they're being discriminated against when they're pursuing homes, or the terms and conditions that they're being offered if they are told about housing. Same thing with real estate sales, being not told about property that may be listed on the market. Mortgage lending, homeowners insurance, those are transactions that are covered by the Fair Housing Act, as well as advertising related to housing. However, most of us aren't aware that the Fair Housing Act actually deals with land use and local governance. So that means that the plans, the announced impediments that I mentioned a moment ago, that's a document that they must put together every 5 years in order to continue receiving their community development block grant funds. What is an announced impediment? Announced impediments, in my opinion, is an X-ray. And I was going to go to medical school. That's something I want to point out as well, Mr. Adrian. Prior to me going to planning school, I was actually planning on going to medical school and pondering becoming a psychiatrist. So a lot of my analogies are medically related.
Okay.
So analysis impediments is a way for us to get not just a snapshot, but a deep image of what barriers exist in a community at the local, county, and state level. So that means how are people able to access housing throughout a community? Are there infrastructure such as good transportation system, public transit? Does the public education system support? Does economic development activities support those areas? And are they distributed throughout a community in such a way that not only certain areas are the nice areas and well-developed and well-maintained areas, but those areas that are the neglected areas, what HUD calls racial and ethnic concentrated areas of poverty. Those recaps, those areas in which you have a high unemployment rate, a low education attainment rate. You have in terms of housing, your housing may be in poor condition. You may have a very low home ownership rate. Or if you do have a home ownership rate, people are having challenges being able to maintain their properties. Well, all those things shape our quality of life. And the entity that actually has a role and responsibility in that, because we think of the private sector, all those of us who deal with the Fair Housing Act, but actually when we're talking about affirmatively furthering fair housing, this is where local government, county government, state government has a role to make sure that from a regulatory standpoint and from a statutory standpoint, that they comply with the federal fair housing laws.
I believe, and again, we look at this show as 21st century fair housing, right? Which for me means, we have to look at it in terms of not only on what we've done in the past, but how does that transform in the future? And so I believe that we have come to the point where we've got to look at the next layer of affirmatively furthering fair housing through programs that allow for access for individuals, landlord mitigation programs, education, and those kinds of things. What do you say?
I agree with that. President Biden, spoke about when he was speaking about the civil unrest that took place in January, earlier this year, that in order for us to heal, we have to look back. However, in order for us to kind of chart and determine where we're going to go, you really have to do an analysis and look where you are, how we got here, and plan where you want to go. So we are in right now a pandemic. Right now, we're anticipating, the federal government has anticipated that because of the drop in unemployment, that many people are going to have challenges being able to maintain their property. So we're going to see a spike in foreclosures. We're also going to see a spike in evictions. We also need to, and with that being said, be mindful of the fact that there are programs that really support communities being able to regain jobs that they actually lost. Well, the only way for us to do that is kind of look back a bit, look where we are, and then make plans to kind of determine where we want to go. So you mentioned the landlord mitigation program that you all offer, and I would even say closing cost assistance and down payment. Persons who are having problems maintaining their homes or being able to stay in the homes in the short run. We need to be looking at a way to broaden those programs, and that's an activity that we have seen over the past, I'd say, 9 to 12 months. That onus really has been a part of local and state government and how we respond to that. We've been, we need the federal government, obviously, in terms of the federal laws that are provided, the funding through all the different departments, offices, and agencies that are offered. However, the place where those things are executed are at the local and state level. The goals that are set, whether you're talking about the assessment of fair housing, which we had a brief period of time, or the analysis impediments, which we're now still using again, those goals are set by the local jurisdictions. That should not be set, and HUD knows that. It should not be set on high at HUD and headquarters. That actually should be where the people are saying, we have this need here. Our education system isn't training us to actually take on these 21st century jobs, whether it's coding, whether it's dealing with the environment, whether it's actually dealing with other fintech in terms of your trading and being able to deal with cryptocurrencies. Those things, robotics, being responsible and training those persons all across the country to be prepared to actually to arrive at a place that they can actually be ready for those jobs and pursue those jobs. That's how you catapult a country, let alone a city, state, township, jurisdiction, or state, as I said, or region, catapult it forward and really make sure its economy is stable and sustainable. So the only way we can do that is plan it. And so that's why I guess I would ask everyone who's watching this, who has control over that, if we fail to plan, then plan to fail.
Absolutely. I did want to make a remark with regards to assessment of fair housing versus analysis of impediments. I've always thought that the assessment of fair housing spoke to systems, whereas the analysis of impediments spoke to people and their needs.
I agree with you. I feel that they, and I will say this, and this is something that I know HUD is grappling with right now, because being here, in the DC area, I'm literally a quarter of a mile from the DC line, probably maybe 7 to 8 miles from the White House in terms of where I am in downtown Silver Spring, give or take. Maybe it might be 10 miles, but it might be, I think, 7 to 8 miles. But anyway, that being said, I know that they're grappling with this issue right now of how do we actually take this document, the assessment of fair housing, because right now we're all using the analysis of impediments, because that's something that they put in a memo was put out in January 26th, dealing with an executive order advancing racial equity. And as a part of that, the administration has asked it's the persons who are part of the transition team to identify what issues came out of the executive order that the previous administration had undertaken and put out in 2020 that dealt with affirmative fair housing. And one of the things that they're grappling with is how can we actually reduce this document? It's a huge document. So when you're talking about systems and versus people, this planning document is a guiding document, and we see that the assessment of fair housing, which as a researcher, hey, give me maps, give me tables, give me data.
Sure.
As a guiding purposes, it really works for me, but it's supposed to be a living, breathing document that the general public should be able to absorb and interpret and use and be able to advocate. So the announced impediments, to your point, it really allowed it to do that. I think that there can be a nice union or a good middle point, that midpoint that we can actually get to, but it must first start and end with the people.
So let me ask you, in your day-to-day, as you perform your duties of going into municipalities and working with governments on their efforts to affirmatively further fair housing, what are you finding is the most difficult aspect of getting that message of AFFH to those government entities across the country?
This is almost something kind of, I would say, primal in us as humans, that we fear the unknown. We fear that this concept of affirmative furthering for housing is going to take control over, and we won't have any local control of how controlling of our destiny here, all across the United States, here in the United States people. So local officials, planning officials, development officials at the state, county, and local level are concerned and are fearful of this. They're concerned that this is going to require people moving into neighborhoods that they aren't interested in and are afraid of, and they're not sure how to handle that. They're concerned and fearful of the type of housing and type of markets that are going to be created, and this nostalgia, losing that, as they say, the kind of the culture of communities. People are concerned about losing that, and that's not what AFFH does. So I would say the messaging and getting people to really just think and accept that we're a community, we're a melting pot. That's what America is. We are a country of immigrants, notwithstanding out of Native Americans and Alaskan Island Pacific Islanders who've been here. Notwithstanding those communities, all the rest of us are immigrants here, brought here by choice or by force. So that means that we need to actually accept and deal with those realities and try to and literally work as we have done. Definitely over the past 150 years, but definitely when we talk about fair housing over the past 50 years, really trying to improve the quality of life, not just of some, but of all.
I also had a comment on that. I mean, do you think that it's because of the way people kind of broadly interpret the Fair Housing Act, that they look at that legislation or they look at that law as, well, that's not about me, that's about them. And they don't realize that any one of us could be a member of a protected class at any time.
Well said. Well said. And in fact, if we want to, let's actually deal with the issue quickly, the issue of disability. Disability is the leading basis in which people file complaints on. Any of us, at any point, if you live long enough, you will be a member of that protected class. So knowing that that is the case, we need to view fair housing and affirmative furthering for housing as us and not them.
That very statement brings us right back to planning. When we look at cities across the country, now I'm geeking out, Jeffrey, I told you this would happen. But when we start looking at the community of individuals with disabilities across our country, we know that because of the convenience and the lack of amenities in some of the more rural areas of the counties, we're basically segregating individuals with disability into city living, correct?
That's exactly what we're doing. And in fact, that's sort of like what we're going to talk about on this training that we're doing on tomorrow on affirmative furthering for housing, fair housing and the discrimination that takes place in legacy zoning, housing building codes. So the Fair Housing Act, as it was amended in 1988, there's a part of this that deals with the Fair Housing Act dealing with disability issues. And so properties that were built, multifamily properties that were built after March 13th of 1991 must comply with the accessibility requirements of the Fair Housing Act. But I said multifamily. That means that there is a whole swath of properties that are being built, as you pointed out, that had been built in the suburbs, subdivisions that have been built. Those are not accessible. The new housing that we're building, now we've actually changed the housing building codes, but I would even say that many of them have not kept pace and are non-compliant. So unfortunately, even though they're out of compliance, and they would be, if they're found, they would be in violation of the Fair Housing Act, we still have some rampant non-compliance in terms of development. So I feel like we need to educate the architects, and many of them are aware of it, but we need to make sure that they are familiar with the Fair Housing Act and the other various codes that deals with accessibility issues, the planning departments, the development departments.
Yeah.
But we also need to deal with, at lastly, I'll say, the investors and homeowners insurance providers as well, getting them to understand, look, you are actually backing or financing these developments. They need to be accessible. They need to be designed in a fashion that they are universally designed. So persons who are disabled, persons who are older persons, everyone can actually use the property, and we're not dealing with functional obsolescence because they can't be used by persons with disabilities. These properties can't be used. We don't need to have that.
And then we know that, okay, so some of the properties might be accessible. Unfortunately, there are no sidewalks for an individual in a wheelchair to use. There are no transportation options. There are no nearby hospitals and so on and so forth. So it really does extend into the quality of life of an individual, which is really what we're talking about here. So I'm running out of time, but I want to ask you this final question, just trying to get some inside information from you. Under the Trump administration, there was some drastic change to the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing.
Yes.
Are there any changes coming with regards to the AFFH under the new administration? What can you tell us?
So I can't say anything because I don't have the total complete inside scoop, and I obviously I have to kind of safeguard the little bit of knowledge I do have. However, what I can do is point to the memo that came out January 26th that the administration that had put out that said one of the tenets is to advance fair housing. So we know, and everyone needs to be paying attention, there was a 2015 rule that was put forth, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule that had been put forth previously by the Obama-Biden administration. Now the Biden-Harris administration is actually looking at what the previous administration did, trying to figure out what challenges or problems came out of that, having us currently deal with the announced impediments. So we all are going to revert back for now back to the announced impediments, but we do anticipate that we may be going back to that 2015 rule, but there are going to be some things that they have to do. They have to make some decisions about which approach they're going to take to do that. But we do know that it has been said that advancing and promoting fair housing is a imperative and actually one of the priorities of this administration.
I'll tell you, it's been real fun and the time's already gone. I really appreciate you coming on here, Jeffrey. I know I'm going to invite you back as things develop. Really enjoyed having you here.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be on the show.
Absolutely. So just to our audience, when I say fair housing in the 21st century, it's a statement of recognition to the fact that we have to build upon the successes of the past.
Yes.
And we have to turn our eyes not only to the present needs, but the future needs of the people that the Fair Housing Act was enacted to protect. And as you heard our guest say, that can be any one of us at any time. Now, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission has always had their eyes toward the horizon. It's in its history, it's in its DNA. I'll give you one example. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was signed into law. But in 1961, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act had a prohibition of discrimination in the selling, leasing, and financing of housing. This is not an anomaly in our history. In 1967, the act was amended to prohibit discrimination in the leasing of housing to persons using guide dogs because of the blindness of the user. So when I say PHRC speaks fair housing in the 21st century, it's a testament to our history of advancing and advocating for protections for those who cannot protect themselves from overt or covert discrimination. For more information, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in a housing transaction, you can visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or give us a call at 787-9780. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@pcntv.com.